Hey, what's up guys? Justin here and welcome back to 65 Drums. Today I'm doing my full review of the Element 2 shell pack from Muzzio drums. Now if you've been a subscriber to 65 Drums for a while, you've seen this drum set pop up in about 10 separate videos over the course of a couple of months. I wanted to make a long-term review talking about all the pros and cons and really give you a full picture of the good and the bad about this drum set. Before I start talking about the mesh heads, the shells, and all the technical stuff, let's actually see the drum set in action. Okay, so now that you've seen the kit in action, let's talk about the sizes of these drums. The kick drum is a 20 by 16, the first tom is a 10 by 6, tom number 2 is a 12 by 7, tom number 3 is a 14 by 8, and finally the snare is a 14 by 5. Now some of the more eagle-eyed people out there might be thinking to themselves, Justin, that doesn't really look like a 20-inch kick drum. And you would be right. I actually have the 18-inch variant that's being phased out. Future drum sets will be made with a 20-inch kick drum instead. Now for me, it's been a pretty refreshing change to play something a little bit smaller than my previous kit, which I still have, the Sonar Force 2001, but these shells are a little bit less deep and the sizes are a tad smaller. So with that limited space that I have behind me right there, it just makes it slightly more roomy feeling. I like the sizes that they have here. I do wish I had the 20-inch variant of the kick drum, but you know what? The 18-inch version is working fine. The thing I don't like about it is the fact that I have to use a lift with it. So an important thing to mention about this drum set is the fact that these are actually legit nice wood shells. These aren't like $200 cheapo wood shells from Alibaba with a really cool looking shell wrap on them. They're actually 6mm 6-ply Birch shells made by a company called Doc Sweeny based in California. And then those shells are sent over to Muzzio drums, who then converts them into electronic. When I was at Winter NAMM, I got a chance to play and see a bunch of their different shell options, and they all look pretty nice. I like the one I have as well. But they also have a higher tier shell line called the MX shell line. And that comes with maple shells instead of birch shells, and you can get them in larger configurations, including a 22-inch kick drum. But of course, the biggest strength of this company is also its biggest weakness. Because they're using nice wood shells, their prices are going to have to be higher to cover that cost. Whether or not you want to pay the extra to get nice birch shells or nice maple shells in your electronic drum set is kind of going to be up to you. This is for a certain kind of electronic drum customer, the person that wants to know that even though their shells aren't being used for their acoustic purpose, they still want to have them and not have a drum wrap, but actually a nice wood finish instead. But of course, I couldn't just use the shell pack by itself, so here's what I've combined it with. 2 roll and crash cymbals, the CY13 and the roll and CY15. I've got the ATV 18-inch ride cymbal, the 2-piece ATV 14-inch hi-hats. I've got reviews on both of those cymbals, by the way, if you want to learn anything more about them. And then finally, here are the modules that I've tested this with. The Roland TD30, the Roland TD17, the Roland TD50, the Pearl Mimic Pro, and then while I was at NAMM, I played like 3 or 4 drum sets from Muzzio drums using the ATV 85 drum module. The drum set worked with pretty much everything I threw at it, except for the TD50. And this was a really weird issue. Let me show you the clip, and then I'll talk more about it in a sec. So I never really figured out what was going on with that. Maybe it was just a simple setting that I could have tweaked and it would have turned that off. It wasn't like the TD50 wasn't picking up all the notes coming from the drums. It's just that the TD50 was choking the sound. It was choking out the resonance of the drums. But anyway, it could have just been an isolated incident to that TD50, and that Muzzio drum shell pack. I don't really know what the issue was there. But other than that one module, it's worked with everything I've thrown at it. The ATV85, the Pearl Mimic Pro, the TD17, and the Roland TD30. Okay, so let's talk about the mesh heads for a second. All these shells come with 3-ply mesh heads on both sides of the drum, which I really like because if you wear out one of the mesh heads, you can always just take the resonant head and then put it on the batter side, and you have a whole new set of free mesh heads. Sometimes companies will skimp out and put like a really thin 1-ply mesh head on the bottom to save cost. That's not really being done here, which I like. They feel high quality. I like playing on them. I do think they're a tad more bouncy than I would like. I hope eventually they go with a slightly thicker material, but they are high quality. I like them a lot. Now, a quick note about the kick drum. You'll notice that the front obviously is not a mesh drum head. So they have a regular acoustic drum head with their logo on it. And then on the other side of that resonant head, they have a giant piece of foam on it. And it's a very heavy duty piece of foam that greatly helps reduce the overall noise of that kick drum. Okay, so jumping ahead to the internals of the drums, let's talk about this trigger setup. It's a little bit more complicated than most electronic drum sets. The only one that's kind of similar to this is probably ATV setup. So the whole idea behind this concept is that you're getting the benefit of a side-mounted sensor, no hot spotting, but you'll also have it so that no matter where you hit on the drum, you're not really that far away from any one of the drum head sensors. But of course, no matter how you design a drum set, there's always going to be at least one trade-off that you're making. On a 16-inch playing surface, it's great because you need more sensors to cover that giant surface area. But in a smaller playing surface like this is only 10 inches across. This is hardly any playing surface at all. And the fact that they're all so close together means that the odds of you accidentally hitting one of them and creating a trigger spike accidentally are a little bit higher. So before I talk about what I think about the overall triggering performance, let's actually see a sensitivity test in action. Okay, so as far as the overall triggering performance of the drum set, it works fine. It's not the best trigger setup that I've ever played on in my life, but it does the job and you will have a great time when you're playing on this, and you can use this trigger system professionally. Okay, so as far as the overall setup process, I did struggle a little bit in the beginning because these shells have been pretty finicky in my opinion. They don't just work with any drum setting that you throw at them. For me, I found what works best consistently is a PDX6 setting. You're gonna have to swing the rim head adjust over to around 5 to 10, depending on the drum. You're gonna wanna crank the rim gain because the rim is overly quiet, so you're gonna wanna raise the sensitivity of the rim, and then you'll get a good result. Now, going back to the rim gain issue, initially I was pretty annoyed about that because this is a $2,000 shell pack. It needs to be like fighting with the best of the best out there on the market. You can't make a shell that has a really, really hot drum head signal and a very, very weak drum rim signal. You need to make them a little bit more balanced than that. But thankfully, the company is aware of this, and they're gonna be tweaking future drum triggers to make the rim more sensitive. Although they did kind of try to spin it in the email that they sent me, they said that they're going to work to make the rim more sensitive for the lower capable drum modules on the market. But I tested this with a Pearl Mimic Pro and a TD50, and they had that issue. So it's not the lower capable drum modules, it's pretty much every drum module. But taken as a whole, the drum set is performing fine. Once you set up everything correctly, you will have a good experience with this whole drum set. Okay, so now it's time to talk about a very significant issue that I was wrestling with early on in the lifespan of this drum set. On the second day that I was playing this for a significant amount of time, it turned out that the kick drum straight up snapped in half. Now thankfully, they don't make that version of the kick drum trigger anymore. I got a generation 1 trigger, and then they had to emergency mail me the second generation of the trigger. So really tall trigger, 1 point of contact with the shell, no cross beams, no metal anywhere. In addition to not having any bracing, it was plastic, which still could work technically, but the problem here is that it had lots of holes in it because this is 3D printed plastic. Now thankfully, they do not make that version of the kick drum trigger anymore. They just make the side mounted version, and I have not had any issues, and it's been triggering fine. And I've been told that they're working on a generation 3 of the kick drum trigger that has even more reinforcement. But to be honest, for a kick drum, you need to be using metal cross beams for that trigger. Plastic is just not the right choice for a kick drum, at least in my opinion. Okay, so now that we've gone over all the individual details of the drum set and my personal experience with it, let's take a step back and just talk about overall, is it a good drum set? Is it worth considering? After all the issues got sorted out, I've been happily playing this drum set for months and months. Just had a very, very rocky early start with it, having to switch over to the different kick drum trigger and then having to wrestle around with different trigger settings until I found what worked good with it. I've loved the fact that it looks freaking cool. I like the shells because they're, birch, so they're like nice wood shells. I like the shell options, the sizes that we have here. And overall, I've just been enjoying the whole package. It's pretty evident to me that Muzzio Drums is still a pretty new company. They're still finding their footing. They're going through some growing pains, but I'm glad that they exist. More competition is always a good thing. There's a couple of different groups of electronic drummers out there. The first group is going to do it themselves. They want to go and buy the shells themselves from Craigslist or from a yard sale. They'll go buy the triggers from UFO Drums. They'll go buy the mesh heads from Joe Becky or Drum Tech, and they'll just put it all together. Some people even go the next step and they'll literally wire it together. They'll go buy the piezo's and the trigger cones and all that stuff and do it all themselves. The second group of people just wants someone else to do it for them for as little as possible. They're going to go buy the $1,000 conversion drum pack from some company, and maybe the shells aren't quite as nice, but it doesn't really matter because the shells don't make the sound. And then finally, the third kind of drummer is the drummer that doesn't want to do the conversion themselves, and they also don't just want to have some cheap drum shells. They want to have something that looks nice, doesn't have a wrap on it or anything, but still is electronic. I feel like Muzzio Drums is more aimed at that customer, and I don't know how big a subgroup of drummers that is, but that's who they're aiming at. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Big shout out to the people on Patreon who helped make this video possible. You're the real MVPs, and I will see you all in a few.